welcome everyone again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that profiles humans behind big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring the future creators, for all those like really great stories. I'm Ira Pastor, your life sciences ambassador along for the journey. So on today's show, we are going to segue back towards the fascinating intersection that we discussed a little bit on the show in the past in relation to that of both science and religion, and have a really wonderful guest joining us today. We are honored to be joined by Imam Sheikh Dr. Usama Hasan, who's currently research consultant at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Recently was a senior researcher and head of Islamic studies at the Quilliam think tank, which is the world's first counter-extremism organization, and was founding advisor to that organization back in 2008. Dr. Hasan has a PhD in electrical engineering from Imperial College, University of London, a master's in theoretical physics from University of Cambridge, master's in mathematics from King's College, and has been a fellow at the Royal Astronomical Society and former planetarium lecturer at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. Before joining Quilliam, Dr. Hasan was senior lecturer of engineering at Middlesex University. He was a visiting professor, associate professor at Pakistan's National University of Sciences and Technologies, and has consulted throughout the artificial intelligence industry in the UK. Dr. Hasan is fluent in English, Urdu, and Arabic, has completely memorized the entire Quran by the age of 11, and served as a part-time imam since his teens, a certified transmitter of both the Quran and Hadith scriptures. He's translated a number of other Islamic texts into English. He is regularly featured on a variety of international television channels, including the BBC, CNN, Sky News, Al Jazeera, and a variety of written columns. Dr. Hasan, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come on and talk to us for a little while today.
Thank you, Ira. A real pleasure and honor to meet you and to be on your program. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. So typically on the show, we start out by handing our guests the floor for a little while, just to really talk about themselves. If we can go back sort of to the beginning, the early background, the sort of, if you can discuss where you grew up, how you developed this very passionate interest both in religion and Islamic studies, but also this range of disciplines from astronomy to information systems, and sort of the merging of the two as you've gone through your career. That'd be a wonderful introduction.
Thank you. That's very kind. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As a devout Muslim, I begin with the name of God, the most merciful, all merciful, which is the first line of the Quran, by the way. So I was fortunate enough to be blessed to be born into a family which is originally from India and then later Pakistan. So my parents are both from India originally. Their entire family has migrated to Pakistan at partition of India in 1947. So my dad was born in India. My mum was born after partition in Pakistan in Karachi. And I was born into a family on both sides, very devout Islamic families, but also religious scholars. So both mum and dad, actually, my mum is a female Quran teacher and Islamic scholar. Dad is a very senior Islamic scholar in the UK. And his dad was a very senior Islamic scholar of India, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, to give you some idea. And in fact, those lineages go back many generations. But after getting married in Pakistan, they'd lived in Saudi Arabia for 6 years. Then they moved to Kenya, Nairobi, where they lived for 9 years. So I was actually born in Nairobi, Kenya. So I'm African by birth, kind of Indian, Pakistani, Asian by extraction, but then kind of British by upbringing, because my parents moved to London when I was just under 5 years old. So I grew up in North London, and really, London is my home. English is my first language, really, although Urdu is the mother tongue, which I speak with my parents still. So I feel kind of blessed to have that very intercontinental, multicultural background, if you like. And so what happened was, with the religious background, as I said, parents on both sides, and large extended families, all devoted to Islamic scholarship and religious devotion, if you like. I was brought up to learn the Quran and, as you said, to memorize it, from a very young age. So from the age of 4, really, I was studying the Quran and memorized it all by the age of 11, as you mentioned. and this was, after school at home.
Hmm.
So I went to a normal primary school, state primary school in North London. And well, one of the blessings of doing the memorization process, which, by the way, nearly all imams have to do, and there's like probably a couple of million of us, a few million of us around the world who've also memorized the entire Quran, is it develops your memory skills, even
Sure.
more. So I found studies very easy, especially memorizing notes and things, at school was very easy. But also, obviously, I had an intellectual curiosity. And at school, my favorite subjects were mathematics, well, always mathematics, and all the other subjects as well, actually. I did well at all of those. And so my parents sent me to private schools in London, and I was lucky enough to gain a scholarship to one of the top uh, private schools in London for what we call, I suppose, sixth form college, what you might call high school
Hmm.
in the US. And that's why, by the grace of God, actually, I ended up studying theoretical physics up at Cambridge University for my first degree, and then moved on to AI, neural networks specifically, or artificial intelligence more generally, for the master's and PhD. And really, the theoretical physics was mainly mathematics, but very applied mathematics rather than the very abstract, pure mathematics, which the mathematics courses offered. But all this time, I was also, uh, a young Quran and Hadith scholar and an imam. So I began leading the prayers actually at age 11, very part-time Ramadan prayers. But Friday prayers, I started at the age of about 18 or 19, actually delivering the sermon. And I was also a student activist and
Sure.
at school and university college. So effectively, I've had this twin track dual career all my life, really, um, from secondary school onwards, or even primary school onwards, of religion and science. Always been very passionate about both. And I was lucky enough to be able to combine the two in some of my work. So I held scientific positions. I had a 20-year scientific career effectively. I actually, so I was a full-time scientist and a part-time imam and kind of religious activist and scholar for many years. And at the age of 40, actually, which is an important age in the Islamic tradition, as I think it is in other religious traditions as well. Life begins at 40. Used to be
Hmm.
a British popular TV program. I actually switched career from full-time science to full-time religious studies with a lot of politics involved, mainly because I felt that my energies were needed more for that in the world. This is a decade after 9/11,
Sure.
and with all the conflict, sadly, around Islam and Muslim communities in the West and in the entire world, I felt that there were plenty of scientists. I still love my science, but there are millions of brilliant scientists who are good at teaching and communicating that to the next generation. And to be honest, I was getting bored teaching the same old stuff, databases basically, to the same course to the students every year at Middlesex University in London, which I did for 9 years.
Hmm.
But I felt actually I had to spend more energies in trying to build bridges, reconciliation, dialogue, that kind of thing, especially with my background. I'm not the only one. There are millions of people like me, but I suppose I have a very strong Western upbringing, but also a strong Eastern
Hmm.
background in upbringing as well. And as I said, African, Asian, British, European um, influences. I have three brothers, all married to Americans, incidentally.
Hmm.
And I love the United States. I've visited about a dozen states in the US. I've been quite lucky.
Excellent.
And I love my visits there. So I felt actually I had to build more bridges. But one of those is religion and science. And one of my favorite publications of the last 5 years has been a 200-page collection of essays, which is effectively a book on religion and science, or specifically Islam's answer to science's big questions,
Hmm.
which is really one of my major passions. And that's free to read, available to download for free if any of you or your listeners are interested. Yeah, I think that's enough for me to. Sorry about going on, a bit of a long introduction, but
No, 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 no.
hopefully it gives you a good idea.
It's a wonderful intro, and I think as you said, building bridges, it bridges right into sort of the next area I wanted to talk about. And obviously, one of the areas which you I think this goes back. I think it's around 2008 when you there was this article in The Guardian, or an opinion letter that you wrote. It was entitled Knowledge Regained. And in contrast to their forebears, modern Muslims have a childlike view of science, especially evolution. This needs to change. And you, in sort of building this, we'll call this first bridge between sort of Islam and evolution, or this discussion, you received obviously a lot of pushback, some opposition. In the article, though, you talk about sort of the fact that centuries before Darwin was on this planet, there were many Islamic thinkers that had, evolutionary-like ideas. And you also talk about some of the, the other issues that, some view Darwinian evolution is maybe an insult in some fashion or what have you. And then you also, as you mentioned in the later on in the report, the task force report that you put together on Islam and science several years later, could you talk a little bit about this sort of event? I'll look at this first event where you're dealing with the intricacies of building this bridge. Talk a little bit about sort of what you faced in 2008, and then also have things changed since the 2016 report, where you sort of revisit some of these issues?
Thank you for that, Ira. So yeah, probably a bit of background before 2008, just very short. So I suppose I've already given it. I mean, I'm already an activist of 20 years by this time in religion and science. I've done a lot of interfaith work, and I have to be honest here, is that I was brought up with most of the Muslim communities in the West that I grew up in, effectively, but also others around the world who had come across. Darwinian evolution was seen as blasphemy, as atheism, as denying God, etc. And it was something we dismissed, so what you might call Muslim creationism, in the sense of denying evolution, because obviously I still believe in creation and evolution, but the denying the science aspect was very strong in my upbringing, and sadly the Muslim world, I would say, over the last century has been dominated by that viewpoint. So I myself used to teach in the mosque and elsewhere that evolution was wrong, and that it was blasphemous and it was against Islam, etc. But what happened after about 2001 is, with my profile as an imam and also scientist, I was invited to a number of top science festivals and kind of interfaith encounters where religion and science were discussed, including at Cambridge and Oxford universities, at the British Academy Science Festival, at the Cheltenham Science Festival, a couple of times at the Science Museum. So many of the top science institutions. And I realized actually that this whole issue of evolution was a crucial one, as you know, for the whole religion and science debate worldwide. And I was forced to re-examine my own ideas about this, which I hadn't really examined, partly because I was always a physicist and actually dropped biology at the age of 13 for various reasons, which probably saved me from a lot of this flack earlier on. But my wife's a biologist, so I learned a lot more about biology when we were married in 1995. And I quickly came to the conclusion that it was actually untenable to deny evolution. I mean, and all the overwhelming evidence of biological evolution, etc. And this was basic biology, and this was a serious issue which had to be confronted. And when the Guardian, I think I became a Guardian columnist, 1 or 2 articles a year, from about 2007, and they asked me to write on something that was close to my heart, and so first I wrote about the astronomy of moon sighting in Ramadan. That's 2007, I think, or maybe beginning of 2008. And then I wrote about this evolution issue. Rightly or wrongly, I mean, I used quite strong words there, actually. And also the Guardian edited out. They had to shorten the length, that editors do. The original article was much longer and tried to make a theological case for my view. So partly, I use some strong language, if you like. Basically being fed up, I suppose, with some of the religious counterparts who were not taking these issues seriously, I felt. But also with the editing, the article looked very harsh, and it did provoke a furious backlash, as you alluded to. So I'd served at my own mosque, for nearly 2 decades by this point. No, sorry, nearly 3 decades. And what happened was rumblings began at the mosque, because I said the same thing on the BBC, but never in the mosque, because I knew this was a very difficult subject. But what eventually happened was in 2011, there was a campaign within the mosque, which went kind of national. People felt that I was no longer qualified or fit to be an imam and to lead the prayers because of the specific view I held, amongst others. But this was their main objection, actually. So in 2011, there was a very high-profile campaign, and I was actually forced to step down as an imam in 2011 and to step down as a trustee the following year, 2012. You know, and I felt that was best for everybody, for myself and everybody else, and the mosque. Do want this kind of controversy to drag on. The sad part of it was I actually people actually distributed leaflets in the mosque and on the internet, which are still there, and on YouTube and stuff, saying that I should be killed for my views on evolution. And I'm talking about British-based other younger imams, former friends of mine actually, who had been part of the band of brothers, if you like. But they went that far, and that actually led to a very dangerous situation at the mosque. The police advised me not to attend; it was physically too dangerous. So sadly, yeah, it's one of the reasons I kind of had to leave the mosque. I was actually put under police protection for 18 months because you know, this is the period when there was still a lot of problem from Al-Qaeda terrorism and later ISIS. And some of the people involved with those death threats were actually linked to Al-Qaeda, basically. So I had to take that seriously. And obviously, I learned a lot from that. Now, that was 2011, as I said. January 2011, that campaign started. So in just a few months' time, it will be a whole decade since that all happened. And I, you know, watch this space, I suppose. I actually feel I've never had the chance to write down or speak fully, set down my entire thesis on reconciling Islamic theology and biological evolution, or the evolution of human beings specifically. And I'm feeling the kind of strong urge to do this over the next few months. It would be a nice way of marking that decade, you know, if God give me life till then. So that's one of the things I'm kind of working on in the background now over the next few months, to actually set down all of my arguments, which I've said in different places, different lectures, etc. But they've never been compiled into one place fully. And I think I owe that to myself, but more so to my audience, to others. Because I think I would obviously say I've been misunderstood a lot, but it's fair perhaps I haven't been as clear as I could have been. You know, a short op-ed is not the place to do a full, detailed discussion of theology and science. So I feel I owe it to my opponents and detractors as well, also, to set out my arguments clearly, and hopefully help to raise and clarify the terms of that debate. I mean, I'm pleased to say that actually over that last decade, everything that happened helped to elevate that debate. There have been a number of debates within the Muslim communities on Islam and evolution in Britain and around the world now. I think it's easier to have that debate now without the death threats and threats of violence, the problem. So I'm kind of pleased that overall, and the many friends and supporters I had around the world, locally, nationally, internationally, I'm very grateful to them for their support, which has helped us all get through this kind of decade. And I'm hoping that we can all help to, as I said, to raise that level. And thank you too for, you know, bringing it up here, because I think this all contributes to that.
Moving along those lines, so if we go from the bridge between Islam and evolution, obviously you, throughout your career, have spent time on some other very, what we'll call grand topics. You've studied, obviously, the cosmos with your experience in astronomy. You've also, you know, early, I looked in your career, a lot of work on artificial intelligence. You've written some, I looked at some of your early papers, fascinating things on cell assembly and virtual robots, and really cutting edge concepts, even for today. can you take us on a little walk through? Obviously, if Islam and evolution's a tough one, is Islam and artificial intelligence, or Islam and cosmology, is it more difficult, less difficult? Talk about some of the bridge building you might be doing in these particular areas as well.
Thank you. That's very kind. So, I suppose I should probably elaborate a bit more on the evolution stuff very quickly.
Sure.
I recommend a book called Darwin's Ghosts by Rebecca Stott,
Okay.
where she talks about the medieval forerunners to evolution. Because I've been criticized, I believe wrongly, for claiming that Muslims somehow had invented evolutionary ideas, or got to Darwin before he did. I don't believe that's the case. But certainly Muslim thinkers had precursors of kind of Darwinian ideas. I think there's no doubt about that, really.
Sure.
And Rebecca Stott's book, Darwin's Ghost, had a whole chapter on the African Islamic scholar called Al-Jahiz, who studied the animals in the jungles of Africa. And we believe he was the first to speak about how animals adapt to their environment, for example. He was also the first to observe that and to say that dogs, foxes, and wolves have a common ancestor, for example. And there's other examples. There's these people called the Brethren of Purity, the Ikhwan al-Safa, some centuries earlier. But as I said, so ideas like adaptation to the environment, survival of the fittest, etc., had been around in the kind of Islamic tradition. But also, if you're a believer like myself, if you believe in one God, you believe in actually prophecy, you divinely guided people who come and who bring scripture, which is divine in some sense, which is the word of God, then it doesn't engender questions once you also accept modern science, of course, which as a scientist I passionately believe in. So cosmology is a good example that you mentioned. There are obvious questions around God and the Big Bang or the origins of the universe. And of course, it's fair to say a lot of leading scientists around the world are atheists or agnostic, whereas others are theists and religious believers. So this was an issue I grappled with, I think, certainly from my first term immediately at Cambridge University, especially when the top physicist there was Stephen Hawking himself, who I had the honor to meet in 2011, actually, at a Google conference in London. And he'd been, touching on these subjects, obviously talking about physics mainly, but touching on the wider issues.
Sure.
And I've published, I've written widely read blogs on my arguments. Actually, I take the view that Stephen Hawking went from an agnostic position in A Brief History of Time to an explicitly atheist position in his later books.
Okay.
And he said he did that in his Google lecture. Actually, he also attacked modern philosophy, which I have a lot of sympathy for not taking science into account enough. And I actually fully agreed with him on that point. But then he also kind of attacked religion and theism for saying it was disregarding science or it was unscientific. And I felt he was wrong there, actually, and I've written about that elsewhere. So I was toying with these ideas, up at university, as you should do. And I was influenced by Christian believing physicists like John Polkinghorne is a famous one, who helped, he worked at CERN and helped discover fundamental particles in the 70s and stuff, but he's a believing Christian physicist. There's another one called Roger Penrose, who's probably agnostic viewpoint, but there were others. I met David Wilkinson, I believe his name is, professor at Durham, but I met him at Cambridge in my first term. So those things fascinated me, of course. I think they fascinate anybody who looks at them.
Absolutely.
The origin of the universe, the Big Bang, theoretical physics, Einstein, relativity, all this stuff. Because, of course, Einstein and his relativity theories, people forget, just revolutionized our understanding of the very basics of the physical universe. I'm talking about space and time, energy and matter. With him unifying energy and matter and also space and time on the other hand, and then bringing those two components together as well. Modern physics it's often not appreciated how revolutionary these ideas are, and I believe we're still grappling with those. And then, of course, for various reasons, I was lucky enough to start working in AI and studying it from 1992 for about a decade, full time in that field, when it was still quite niche. Our company helped to build intelligent systems for decision making in in banking and telecoms, fraud detection. I built my own number plate recognition system in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was doing when 9/11 happened. And so I was kind of torn between this cutting edge AI technology and this kind of global conflict around the world, which kind of really kicked off. But as I said, it was a niche area then, and now it's great to see AI everywhere. You know, in our smartphones and in everything that we do. And I have friends, for example, who know AI, but who are working in the field. For example, they're selling AI solutions or they're selling AI products, and they're from a business or management background. And it's really quite pleasing to hear them talking about AI concepts. You know, it is everywhere. And as you mentioned, the robotics are this great strides are being made in that. Now, of course, AI and robotics throws up another whole area of issues for religious people, especially about the nature of consciousness and the soul. You know, whether there is such a thing as the human soul, or what is it? When we speak of soul and spirit, what do we mean when we speak of humanity? There are obvious questions that throws up. And over the last few years, I've attended a major conference just last year, I think, at Cambridge University on this, where we had people from the Vatican. You know, we had an American chap from the Vatican, we had other theologians of other religions discussing precisely AI and religion. And I think it's fascinating and very fun, but also very profound and stimulating and interesting conversations that we're involved with. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've had a few guests on the show on this topic, and it is interesting how much, or just sort of the wealth of conferences and other organizations, things going on where, you know, it's in 2020, it's time to really bring this topic and others like it to the table and discuss what we're doing with it, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, everyone, you know, has to be there, sort of, especially in sort of the layout of the land today and the way all these technologies are progressing. Along those lines, I want to take you now a little deeper, let's say. You have this interesting, fascinating paper, actually, that you wrote for the European Journal of Palliative Care. It was entitled Health, Sickness, Medicine, Life and Death in Muslim Belief and Practice. And as part of it, you refer to this, probably if I got this wrong, but sort of this principle of the remembrance of God in all matter, the divine origin. And this, and you mentioned, holds true for whether we're talking about life, death, health, sickness. God is involved with all of it from an Islamic perspective. I'd like to get some of your views. So we're talking about in this era now of these technologies, whether they are AI or robotics or biologic tools, whatever, where we are seeing this philosophical movement known as transhumanism, which we've talked a bit about on the show. This belief, the advocates for basically transforming the human condition via these technologies, whether that's in enhancing intellect or physiology, whatever. Could you take us on a walk through sort of the Islamic view on this overarching topic of transhumanism and I know, like, putting this out there, but obviously we've heard throughout history that this technology, whether it's organ transplantation or heart-lung machine or whatever it may be, we're playing God. Take us a little bit into the Islamic view on sort of what happens when these technologies get us a little too close, let's say, to playing God, and where we're going with this in the Muslim world.
I think the first thing to say is that there is no one definitive Islamic view on this.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's very important to say when it comes to religion, as it is with science, for example, but especially with religion, it's very important to recognize that, you know, there are multiple views within every religion.
Sure.
And these things are being discussed, fervently, sometimes heatedly. So there are, Jewish views on this, there are Christian views, there are Hindu views, there are Buddhist views, there are certainly Islamic views. And I, of course, um, I'm aware of that with the whole controversy around biological evolution, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So just bear that in mind, is that within Muslim communities, there will be people who will not engage with this topic at all.
Sure.
They'll just dismiss the whole idea of transhumanism, as people were dismissing the whole idea of evolution, for example. But for me, that's not a tenable view, because clearly the technology has revolutionized every aspect of our lives practically, and the world. So, we have to obviously engage with these issues now. And this is why I suppose I got involved with some of the other debates. I believe it's a matter of integrity. If you're a scientist or a religious person, or you're both,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me you have to be consistent, in your view of the world. Many people compartmentalize the two, for example, science and technology on one side, and religion somewhere else. But to me, that doesn't make any sense ultimately. So we have to deal with this topic, and now that's where we get to the ultimate nature of humanity, because
Mm-hmm.
of course the religions have a lot to say about that, and and I take a view which I believe is an Islamic universal view, which is very consistent with other religions as well,
Okay.
which basically says that all of creation, or all of existence, because my atheist friends, some of them don't like the word creation, obviously, because they don't believe in a creator, right?
Sure.
So they would use something like being, or I don't know, existence. But all of creation or existence or being is permeated by the divine. I mean, that's a theological position I take, because, as you said in the question, God is involved with everything. Now, that's where the remembrance of God comes in. In other words, creation is there to, or existence is there to glorify God, effectively. And this is also related to the teachings or the ideas or the meanings that we are created in the image of God. So by the way, it's quite ironic. We might say that God created human beings in His image, or in God's image, in the divine image, and arguably we are creating intelligent robots in our image. That's one way of putting it. I think it's helpful to think along those lines in terms of religious perspectives on these things. Now, but another aspect to that is that there's the distinction between the human and the non-human, I believe, is blurred. It's not as sharp as many religious traditional believers kind of used to believe, or still believe,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a fundamental distinction between human beings and the rest of the world, including the animal and plant world. And now you see, this is one of the issues around evolution, is that for me, I think the science is very clear when we see how our DNA includes the DNA of all the other animals and plants even out there. We can trace
Sure.
the kind of evolutionary lineage in that. So, we are fundamentally a part of the natural world, including minerals, plants, and animals. There isn't such a sharp distinction, although in capacity or in our intelligence there is. We obviously have this we have this advantage. So the human brain is, in a sense, the most complex uh, object or organism known to modern science, and that's why, of course, we achieve all these great things that we do. But fundamentally, all of the plant and animal world, and even the mineral world beyond that, is engaged in a remembrance of God, if you like. Now, when parts of that world are then blurred with the human world, such as injecting silicon chips into our bodies, or you can have something transplanted into your brain, which is connected to the internet, for example. A thin sheet. Those things have been done. Then what we are effectively doing is exactly what the word says: transhumanism. We are kind of extending the human experience
Mm-hmm.
beyond what it was traditionally. In fact, humans have been doing this um, since day one, if you like, with every new technology, fire, the wheel, transport, communication. We extend the human experience. But of course, now we're doing it, well, it's much more exponential now. We can see how it's so exponential, the growth in science and technology,
Mm-hmm.
that these things will revolutionize, I suppose, human experience. The way perhaps you could say that the invention of fire once did, or the invention of wheels, or other the printing press, digital technology, that kind of thing. and we have to grapple with that now. So my position is that all of existence, whether it's what we used to call inanimate objects, rocks and protons and neutrons by themselves,
Mm-hmm.
cosmic stardust, whether it's that or whether it is plants and animals and human beings, are all fundamentally operating within a kind of divine framework. And there's a moral choice there for human beings. The morality obviously comes into it. Good
Sure.
issue of good and evil, and being responsible for our actions. Now, I think those basic questions still apply to transhumanism, but transhumanism kind of poses a whole bunch of new questions and new experiences that we are still trying to work out. So,
Mm-hmm.
with things implanted, injected into our brains, question of morality or choice, free will, which had always been contested by philosophers, religious
Sure.
people, and scientists ever. But and obviously that's a difficult question. But I do believe in free will in some sense, and of a moral choice, which is fundamentally boils down to good versus evil. Those are the moral choices that we make every day and are kind of answerable to. Those choices will still be there. It's just that our brains will have access to all kinds of information or different aspects of memory. The memory will be different. The access to information will be different. But in terms of what we do with that technology, we
Mm-hmm.
will still have a moral choice, just as we've always had. You can use fire to cook, or you can use fire to burn your enemy. You can use nuclear technology to generate peaceful nuclear energy, nuclear
Yep.
power, as the French do largely. Or you can use nuclear technology, of course, to kill people with nuclear bombs. Now, I think the same thing will happen with all of these new technologies, is that we will merge with robots effectively, or if you like, that distinction between human and robot will slowly
Mm-hmm.
become blurred. So we will have robotic technology within us as human beings, with silicon material inserted into us, or technologies, and also robots will have biological functioning. As you probably know, there's research into building robotics using biological organisms, if you like, or mechanical devices using biological approaches in a kind of acceleration of the old evolution, if you like. So these things will become blurred, but they will open up all kinds of new questions. But some of those fundamental moral questions will still be the same, I believe, and the ethical considerations will be the same. And then we will, people who are believers, religious believers in the transcendent or the divine, as well as scientists, will have a whole new set of questions. Just as for the last century or so, we've been grappling with questions like, are organ transplants, ethical? Is blood transfusion ethical? Um, how much can you, as you said, play God? I believe that God has given us the power to not to play God, but to well, effectively play human beings within our spheres, within our sphere of influence, which is expanding now, if you like. But we are created in the image of God, so there is an element where you have to be very careful with wording, because believers will accuse you of blasphemy if you get the wording
Sure.
wrong. So as monotheists, we can't be like God, but in a sense we are, because God created us in His image, and so we are effectively playing God. But the question is to do it for good and not for evil, basically. And that includes genetic engineering, all the biotechnologies, which are breathtaking, fascinating, but also very scary in many ways.
Yeah.
The way we can edit genes down to such a fine level now.
Absolutely. And I think you sum it up quite elegantly in that paper, where you say human life is only valuable in as much as it allows for righteous deeds or positive contributions and actions. And I think that's when you talk about the moral element here, it's I thought it was a very nice way to sum it up. The you have this website where you do your blogging. It's the Unity website. it mentions dedication to the unity of God, the unity of knowledge, and the unity of people, which sitting here on the United States East Coast, we need a little more of that today. You mentioned obviously working on the evolutionary thesis further. Can you take a few minutes and just talk about some of your new other plans, things you have going on, whether they're going to be in science, whether they're going to be in Islamic studies, any announcements, anything that you can talk about in the coming months, year or two that we should be watching at your blog?
I think I've already let the cat out of the bag. I think the main one will be coming back to the question of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had to keep quiet on the subject for at least 2 years. I actually just shut my mouth. I mean, well, CNN did the one interview, but they wanted to do more. BBC Hard Talk
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do a whole half an hour with me, precisely on this issue of Islam and evolution. And because of the issue at the mosque, I said, I simply can't. I would have to leave my position immediately. And that was in the early time, where I left my position a year later. But by that time the issue had kind of died down, so the BBC were no longer interested. So, as I said, I haven't been able to actually set out my arguments in full. I think that will be my main passion over the next 3 or 4 months. But also increasing work probably on core Islamic theology in terms of different interpretations of the Quran and Hadith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite opinionated, as many people are, and I will try to give my own judgment or view on my take on a particular scientific question or a religious question, or one that affects both. But what I also try to do, and I've kind of learned to do as I've got older, is to give the different interpretations from within the Quranic Scripture and the Islamic tradition. As I alluded to earlier, I think that's very important. There is no one monolithic Islamic view or
Sure.
religious view or even scientific view on many issues. With the whole COVID thing, the British government has been saying, follow the science, we're following the science.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what they mean, but for a lot of non-scientists, I think it's very important for them to realize that often the science is contested, or highly complex issues. There is no one scientific answer, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's contributed to a lot of the confusion around, say, COVID,
Yeah.
where people are saying, well, why can't the scientists agree? Or surely everybody must know what to do if you're following the science. Well, for simple question like 2 + 2 = 4, I mean,
Yeah.
there's no arguing about that. But it's very important, I think, for scientists to help to convey to non-scientists the nature of non-linear, complex kind of processes. Now,
Absolutely.
there's something similar with the whole religious viewpoint, and
Okay.
especially with Islam. Often the worst kind of excesses or arguments of Muslims doing really evil things in the name of Islam were often presented as the only form of Islam, or the true face of Islam. So Islam is all evil and terrorists, and Muslims are all bad people and supporters of terrorism, for example. That was a big one for the last 2 decades since 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, it's very important to bring out different interpretations of the Quran as it is of other religious traditions and scriptures. And you mentioned unity of the world. One of the things I'm seeing working as an imam in Britain is an increasing number of people wanting to get married from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So increasingly interfaith, intercultural, interracial marriages. And sadly, human beings are very tribal, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
In the US with the elections coming up, we see a lot of resistance from some Muslim families and Christian and other families I've seen, Hindu, Sikh, Jewish, for their sons and daughters, for example, to marry outside of the faith. So interfaith marriages, you will see, actually, I've blogged once or twice on that.
Okay.
The stats are very high. That is actually the most read paper on my blog used to be, or most read blog post used to be, about evolution.
Mm-hmm.
That was certainly that one a decade ago.
Yeah.
But for the past 6 or 7 years, actually, it has been consistently overtaken by a blog piece on interfaith marriage.
Huh.
And even today, just before coming on the show, I replied to another query from the Philippines. For some reason, I have a lot of queries from the Philippines on Muslim Christian interfaith
Sure,
marriages, for example.
sure.
So that's another one, which I see as a kind of unity of peoples around the world kind of idea. But I think you mentioned it. Unity of knowledge is something which a lot of people, a lot of my friends, kind of believe in. I believe in very strongly. Others might argue and say you have no evidence or basis for it. It's kind of a belief, but I have a very strong kind of faith in God and in a one God, and God is the source of all knowledge. And on the basis of that, there has to be a unity of knowledge. So if you believe, as I do, that scientific knowledge ultimately comes from God because it's a discovery of the laws of science or the laws of
Hmm.
nature which underpin the way God created the world, if God created the world to work like that, on the basis of such exquisite and precise scientific laws. And then you have all other aspects of human knowledge as well, of the arts, the humanities, the mystical experience, religious experience. I mean, all of these are different forms of knowledge.
Yeah.
I have the strong sense that they are all united somehow. There has to be unity behind it all. Otherwise, probably go schizophrenic myself. But I mean, I suppose I learned that as a child, really, learning certain things in the mosque and learning other things in the school classroom, and seeing other things out in life and on the television, for example, in the media.
Sure.
And I'm one of those people who says, well, actually, this all has to be united somehow. So that's why I think the religion and science type stuff, with I hope getting to lay down um, more and contributing more to the debate on that whole evolution thing, um, and also on other aspects of cosmology and religion. The AI debate, certainly. I think as AI is, as we said, is spreading more and more, those issues are becoming more and more acute. Governments, the British government has research councils or ethics councils to look at these issues, especially the ethics
Hmm.
of the emerging AI technologies. I think governments around the world are doing that. In some of my work now, I try to advise governments on these issues. So those are things I hope I will continue to get involved with, and at the same time, on the religious side, interfaith kind of work to bring people together. That's the unity of the world. So as my blog line says, yeah, the unity of the people of the world is very important, especially when people are so tribal, when things are so polarized politically, religiously. I think there is still a space for kind of civilized democratic debate, where no matter how much people differ on the political or religious views, I believe it is actually possible to live together. But you have to work hard. You have
Sure.
to work very hard at peacemaking and trying to understand other people's viewpoints and not misrepresenting what your opponent or enemy says, to actually see the humanity in other people as well. Um, so I think that's really important. And then the unity of knowledge, that brings in the whole religion, science, and other aspects. Um, and the mention about the unity of God, of course, refers to a deeply held kind of transcendent belief that all of this is permeated by the divine. But and of course, my atheist and agnostic friends will dispute that. But that's basically my approach to outlook on life at the moment, and has been for a long time. But rightly or wrongly, I will try to continue kind of working on that basis. And I'm very grateful to you for giving me an opportunity to talk about it.
Steph, one final question for you. We typically do a wrap-up question. You mentioned early on the importance of obviously your parents, both from sort of introducing you to both the science and religion. Obviously you've met many fascinating people in science throughout your career. Also, starting so young as Imam in the mosque. Are there any other important mentors, influencers that you may want to mention at this point that really have helped craft who Dr. Usama Hasan is and have kept you on this path to date?
It's a good opportunity, I suppose, to thank a whole bunch of people.
Please do.
I think parents and family are very important. Certainly have been in my life. I think all traditional religions are very family oriented, and certainly my childhood was very strongly oriented. But you know, when you have a large family, it becomes essential. I mean, I have something almost 50 first cousins. Would you believe? You know, because both mom and dad are from large families.
Sure.
My parents have 26 grandchildren, so
Cool. God bless him.
that's and only four of those are my own children with my wife. So you know, I have 22 nephews and nieces, for example. So certainly family, and that includes my parents-in-law. My wife and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. That's our silver anniversary just a few weeks ago, actually, last month. So my parents-in-law have been huge influences also, like a second set of parents. But beyond that, it has to be my teachers, you know, at primary school in London, also at the mosque. But yeah, mosque and school. The British teachers I had, we had a few Australians and New Zealanders and Indians and Pakistanis as well, were brilliant, all dedicated to their education. At university as well, of course, our lecturers, same kind of thing. And then in my kind of student activism, my religious groups, the scientific circles, um, I've tried to learn. I've tried to learn from everybody. My mum taught me one thing actually. Well, she taught me many things. The one thing she taught me was that you must always respect your teachers, even if they've taught you one thing. Even if they only taught you one thing, they are your teacher, and you have to respect them. And it's actually a very difficult thing to stick to rigidly, especially when you have a falling out with some of your teachers or your friends who have taught you stuff, you know. And sadly, some even become enemies or opponents, and it becomes very difficult to remember that you should still be grateful to them for teaching you that one thing or those many things. So I could name lots of people
Sure.
from past history as well, of course. All of the great scientists that you named, from Newton to Einstein and before that, or all the great Islamic scholars and figures, starting from the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, and all the other great religious figures, all the way through to the great imams and theologians. Uh, but through to today, my colleagues, mentors, people I work with around the world are of course a huge source of inspiration. When
Sure.
it comes to religion, I suppose today there's a chap called Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, and there's another chap based in the US, in California, called Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who are, in my view, two of the greatest Islamic scholars alive today. I've learned a lot from them actually, and translated some of Sheikh bin Bayya's works. And when it comes to the science, of course, I felt very lucky to meet Stephen Hawking. I've met Roger Penrose and Richard Dawkins as well. So some of the top scientists in the world. And you know, despite my disagreement with Dawkins, for example, and Hawking on religion, but of course they were great scientists. And then an astronomer friend actually must have special mention, Dr. Robert Massey of the Royal Astronomical Society.
Okay.
He's been a great kind of inspiration and friend on the astronomy side of things, and has always encouraged my kind of continuing with the religious side of things, even though he doesn't share that passion, but he does kind of encourage me to continue that search for integrity, in terms of reconciling what I genuinely held beliefs as well as scientific kind of conclusions. And on that, I suppose the book we co-wrote in 2016 with about a dozen other, mainly Muslim scholars, philosophers, theologians, and scientists. That was very important there. Professor Ekmelettin Ihsanoglu, who is almost 90 now, based in Turkey, and is still a politician at the age of 90.
Yeah.
He was the big inspiration. And Professor Nidal Gassoum, who's based in the UAE, who's done a lot of work on reconciling Islam and science, and wrote the book called Islam's Quantum Question, as well as the more recent book, A Young Muslim's Guide to Science, which is very important. And similarly, there was a chap called Sayyid Hussein Nasr in the US who wrote A Young Muslim's Guide to the Modern World.
Okay.
He was also a physicist to begin with, but he's known throughout the Muslim world as an Islamic scholar and theologian and philosopher. So those are just some of the names that come to mind, actually. But you know, there are many others, of course. And again, I think I should end with that. You know, the Quran has a chapter called the Honeybee. The Quran has 114 chapters, and they have some of them are named after Moses, Abraham, Joseph, Mary, great people. But many of the chapters of the Quran are named after natural phenomena. which is of interest to scientists. You know, so we have the elephant,
Sure.
we have the honeybee, we have the sky, the dawn, the sun, the moon. You know, you name it, the star. Um, and we have a rabbi friend here who is a beekeeper and who
Okay.
taught my nephew to become a beekeeper.
Huh.
And he's an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. And he would quote the Quranic chapters on the honeybee when he was introducing, because he said he didn't find in any scripture, including his own Jewish scriptures, any kind of reference to the honeybee and the beehives the way you have in the Quran, a couple of short verses. But just on that, one of the things I learned from the Islamic teachers was you have to be like the honeybee. And you know, this is probably not entirely scientifically accurate, but it's a nice sentiment. It says,
Sure.
try to go and learn from every flower. Try to benefit from every flower, to suck some nectar out of every flower you see, and then make your own honey with your own mixture. And I suppose many people will say that in religion and science. You know, try to learn something from every situation, from every experience, from every person you meet, because they will all have experience or knowledge that you don't have. And so try to learn from them and then use it to better yourself, I suppose, and to understand the world better. So and again, it's difficult to do, especially when there's conflict.
It's true.
And there's a lot of conflict around, but it's difficult. But I certainly try to do that, and that's why, in that sense, you know, I'm kind of grateful to everybody, even my opponents, because you learn from your opponents because they force you to rethink your own views. I've always tried to do that, is to try to learn from every situation and every people. So I can't possibly thank everybody,
Sure.
because that's everybody who's ever crossed crossed paths with in life. But
Understood.
thank you for giving me the opportunity to name some of the ones that came to mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's you know, it says something that you do have all those folks that have indeed shaped you, and you're willing to open yourself up to so many different viewpoints and interactions, and that's extremely important as we delve into these themes. So thank you for that summation. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode on the various podcasts or watching on the YouTube channel, we've been spending time with the amazing Imam Sheikh Dr. Usama Hasan, research consultant, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Check out his Unity blog, where he talks about the unity of God, knowledge, and people. Amazing messages. Dr. Hasan, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. Thank you for everything you're doing, and especially in building these bridges between science and religion, an extremely important endeavor in today's age. And as we say on the show, thank you for moving the human story forward. Really very inspiring discussion, and an honor meeting you.
Thank you very much, Ira. Real honor and pleasure to meet you and to talk to your listeners. Thank you very much.